Forget everything you think you know about medieval romance. Knights in shining armor? Sure. Damsels and dragons? Sometimes. But what if I told you these epic tales, born over 800 years ago, were less about simple fairy tales and more about a radical new idea, consciously fictional storytelling, and that hidden within these adventures are complex human struggles and surprising ideas about love and honor that might just resonate with life today. So, what was medieval romance really about? We're diving into a world of epic adventures, complex ideas about honor, and very particular and sometimes strange notion of love. Get ready to explore what these stories truly were, who they were for, and why these tales from the Middle Ages might still hold some surprising relevance for us today. Chapter 1. Defining the genre. Fact versus fiction. First off, let's define our terms. Chivalric romances, which really took off in the 12th century, are fundamentally stories about the adventures of knights. They celebrate the idealized code of behavior. Think loyalty, incredible bravery, honor above all, and a very specific concept called courtly love. But notice that word, idealized. These stories presented a highly polished vision, not always a reflection of the often rough and tumble reality of medieval aristocratic life. Interestingly, the word romance itself didn't originally mean love stories. It came from the Old French word romance, which simply meant the vernacular language, the everyday French spoken by the people, as opposed to the Latin used by the church and scholars. Writing in Romance meant these adventure stories could reach a wider audience, particularly the knights and ladies of the courts. It was one of the first major genres in Western Europe to be consciously fictional. Before this, most writing in the vernacular focused on history, religious teachings, or things considered factual truth. As the scholar D.H. Green notes in the beginnings of medieval romance, the second half of the 12th century saw the emergence of a new genre, which was consciously conceived as fiction and therefore allowed largely to break free from traditional presuppositions. This emergence wasn't instantaneous, but figures like the French poet Chrétien de Troyes, writing in the later 12th century, were absolutely pivotal. His Arthurian romances, written in elegant octosyllabic verse, masterfully blended existing legends with new adventures and complex characterizations, effectively codifying many elements we now associate with the genre. This innovative, fictional approach proved incredibly popular and influential, quickly spreading across linguistic and geographical borders. It was a pretty radical idea for the time. It meant that writers were playing with the boundary between truth and lies, creating entertainment that wasn't pretending to be a historical record. It was a kind of agreed-upon make-believe between the author and the audience. They often borrowed historical settings or names, but the adventures, the magic, the perfect knights, that was often pure invention. Chapter number 2. The core ingredients. So, what were the essential ingredients of these stories? First, you have the knight. Not just any soldier, but an idealized figure embodying chivalry. Courage? Of course, but also unwavering loyalty, impeccable manners, a strong sense of justice, and deep honor. Often we see the knight-errant, a wandering warrior actively seeking out adventures to prove his worth and live up to this demanding code. Think of figures like Lancelot, Gawain, or Percival from the Arthurian legends. Their quests and actions were often driven by service, to their lord, to a noble lady, or to the code itself. You can almost see the seeds of modern superheroes in these archetypes, figures bound by a strict ethical code striving for an ideal. Next up, the quest. This was the engine driving most romances. Knights embarked on perilous journeys, often structured as a series of episodes or challenges. What were they seeking? It could be rescuing a captured noblewoman, defeating a tyrannical giant or a fearsome dragon, finding a sacred object like the Holy Grail, or simply proving their valor against all odds. These quests frequently took knights into enchanted forests or mysterious castles, places brimming with magic, illusions, spells, and supernatural beings. But they weren't just physical trials. Quests often involved deep moral dilemmas, testing the knight's commitment to that chivalric code we talked about. It's easy to see how this structure laid the groundwork for centuries of adventure stories right up to today's fantasy epics. And then there's courtly love, or fin amour, as it was called in south of France, where many of its ideas originated in poetry. This is probably the most famous and perhaps most misunderstood aspect of medieval romance. It wasn't usually about cozy domestic bliss. Courtly love was typically depicted as an intense, idealized, often secret, and frequently unattainable passion. A knight would devote himself entirely to a noble lady, performing great deeds in her name, suffering patiently, and valuing her honor above all. It emphasized longing, service, and discretion. It's a complex concept that shaped centuries of literature about love and desire, and its echoes, both the noble ideals and the potential complications, still resonate how we think about romance today. Beyond these three, romances were filled with themes of faithfulness tested under pressure, the constant struggle between good and evil, and journeys to exotic, imagined lands. If you're finding this journey into the past interesting, please take a moment to hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And consider subscribing so you don't miss a thing. Chapter number 3. Ideal versus reality. But these stories didn't exist in a vacuum. They blossomed during the 12th and 13th centuries, a time of significant social and cultural transformation in Europe. Feudal society was evolving. Courts were becoming centers of culture, and a distinct aristocratic identity was being forged. These romances were written primarily for this aristocracy. Wealthy patrons, including powerful and educated women like Eleanor of Aquitaine, commissioned and supported poets and writers. The stories entertained, but they also reinforced the values, aspirations, and social distinctions of the knightly class. They presented a model, albeit an idealized one, of how nobles should behave. And remember, in an age before widespread printing, these stories often came alive through readings aloud in courtly settings, or through painstakingly copied manuscripts, sometimes lavishly illustrated. These weren't just texts. They were often social events and treasured objects, adding another layer to their cultural significance. It's crucial to remember that gap between the ideal and the reality. While romances celebrated honorable combat and refined manners, actual medieval life for the aristocracy could involve brutal warfare, political maneuvering, and social inequalities completely glossed over in the stories. Chivalry itself was more of a code, an aspiration, than a consistently followed rulebook. And it's important to recognize that even within the romances, the ideals weren't always presented without question. Scholars reading these texts today, as suggested by the New Cambridge Companion, often find tensions and ambiguities beneath the polished surface. Stories might explore the tragic consequences of flawed chivalry, the difficulties and contradictions of courtly love, or hint at the violence underlying the aristocratic world these knights inhabited. While celebratory, they weren't always simple endorsements of the status quo. So, if these stories were acknowledged as fiction, how did writers get away with telling untrue tales in an age focused on religious and historical truth? Authors often justified their work using a principle from the Roman poet Horace, that literature should aim to be both pleasing and useful. Even if the story wasn't literally true, it could offer moral lessons, showcase virtue, or provide allegorical insights, all while being an enjoyable escape. There was a kind of unspoken agreement, a fictional contract, where the audience knew they were entering a world of make-believe designed to instruct and entertain. Chapter number 4. Why these stories still matter. Which brings us to the final question. Why should we, centuries later, care about these old stories? Well, their legacy is immense. Medieval romance is the ancestor of so much modern literature, especially fantasy. The tropes of the quest, the heroic knight, the wise mentor, The magical elements, the codes of honor, so many staples of fantasy storytelling have their roots right here. While many early romances, like those by Chrétien, were in verse, octosyllabic couplets being common in French. The genre later saw a massive shift towards sprawling prose cycles, especially in the 13th century. Think of huge interconnected stories of the Vulgate cycle, which told the grand saga of Arthur, Lancelot, and the Grail quest in prose. This move allowed for even more intricate plots and character networks, weaving together multiple storylines in ways verse found more challenging. This tradition culminated in later works like Sir Thomas Malory's Le Mort d'Arthur. In the 15th century, a monumental prose compilation which itself became a major source for countless future adaptations of the Arthurian legend. And the influence spread south too, blending with other traditions in Italy and the Iberian Peninsula, leading eventually to immensely popular works like Amadis de Gaula. But beyond genre history, these romances explore themes that are still deeply human and relatable. Think about it. The search for meaning and purpose, the quest, the complexities of love and desire, courtly love, the struggle to live up to ideals, making difficult moral choices, the importance of loyalty, and the pain of betrayal, navigating social expectations versus personal feelings. These are timeless dilemmas. As Roberta Krueger puts it in The New Cambridge Companion to Medieval Romance, romance, as a genre that places individual emotional experience into the historical narrative and gives it equal weight and moral significance, is the kind of narrative that most closely answers to the business of actual living a human life. That connection to fundamental human experience means the character might wear armor, but their struggles can still speak to our own experiences of trying to navigate ideals versus reality in our own lives. Understanding medieval romance helps us understand the DNA of Western storytelling. Plus, let's be honest, there's a pure fascination in exploring these intricate worlds, a form of historical escapism into a past that feels both strangely familiar and wonderfully different. So, medieval romance, far more than just simple tales of knights and dragons. It was an innovative, complex, and truly pan-European genre born from a specific time and place, grappling with big ideas about heroism, love, society, and the very nature of fiction itself. What do you find most interesting about medieval romance? Are there any particular stories or themes that resonate with you? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, check out my sources below, and see you in the next one.